So we've seen four different approaches as to how to reconcile the contradiction between two brisos with regard to Reb Shimon, whether or not an onain is excluded from Korban Pesach or included in the Korban Pesach. And this culminated with the approach of Abaye that finished here on Daf Kuf Omen Aleph. And now we start Daf Kuf Omen Beis to introduce the fifth shita as to how we can reconcile the two brisos of Reb Shimon, and that's Rav. Rav Amar Idi ve'idi acher chatzos. Even though the Misa took place after Chatzos, and the Isur, and the Chiyuv of Korban Pesach was already Chal. Nevertheless, we're still going to assume that the Onen is not allowed to eat the Korban Pesach. Why? Kan Korban Sheshchato Zorak Olav, and Kan Liachas Sheshchato Bizark Olav. If the relative died after Chatzos. At Chatzos, before the death of his relative, they already shechted the Korban Pesach, and they were zorek the dam for the sake of this Chaim Yankel, this relative. So what are we going to say now? We're going to say now, well, Chaim Yankel's sister just died, and therefore he's out. What do you mean he's out? They already shechted the carbon on his behalf. So it sounds like what Rav is going to argue is that once they did the Zrikas Adam on his behalf, we're going to allow him to eat from the carbon, even though an onan is not allowed to eat from the carbon. So the Gemara immediately rejects this. I don't get it. You're worried about achilas ha-basar. I'm worried about the hakrava. Meaning, when we say that Korban Pesach is a chiyuv kares, if you don't bring Korban Pesach, we're talking about bringing the offering of the Korban Pesach. This Korban Pesach was offered on behalf of this Chaim Yankel. Now he becomes an onen. Now what are you going to tell me? We're going to allow him to eat from the basar? What are you talking about? An onen is not allowed to eat from the basar. And now we're not talking about a chiyuv kares, because the achila of the basar is totally independent of the hakravas hakarbon. They're two different mitzvahs. Now one is not ma'akiv the other. Amalei Ravina says achilus psachim mi'akva midarabba barafuna. Again, we don't know what Rabba Barafuna said, but we're going to find out later. But whatever he said, the conclusion is, says Ravina, that Rava is of the opinion that the achilas of Pesach is an integral part of the havas hakarbon. And since, according to Rava's logic, they already brought the carbon, meaning they shechted it, and they did all the avodas culminating in the Zrikas Adam on behalf of this Chaim Yankel, then we're going to allow him, even though he became an onen, to eat the carbon Pesach, because otherwise the whole carbon will be gone with the wind. Because achilas hakarbon and havas hakarbon, according to Rava, are two integral parts of one whole. So Rava says to Rav Ada, because Rav Ada was the one who tried to slug up Rava, you know what? Listen to your Rebbe. Your Rebbe's making a lot of sense. My de Rabba Barafuna, what was the statement that Ravina referred to of Rabba Barafuna? The Sanya, Yom Shmua. Oh, all right, this is already, let's just see what the clock says. Oh, okay. Okay. I don't know. I think we better quit while we're ahead here, because now we're getting into complicated issues about Yom Shmua. I'll just give an introduction to the next sugya. There are three categories of onen. Okay, one is Yom Kvura, and again that itself splits into two. But let's say he lost his relative on that day, and they buried him on that day. That's Spitz Aninus, that's the real McCoy Aninus. Then we go down one level, and that's called Yom Shmua, meaning he only heard the bad news about the death of his relative later on. What's later on? It means within the first 30 days of his death. Then there's a third category, which is the lowest category, and that's called Yom Likut Atzamos, which means that a person is interred in, let's call it place X. And then, for any number of reasons, the decision was made to take his bones out of the kever, out of the burial, and reinter him elsewhere. This is quite common now. Became a little bit popular with regard to burying in Eretz Yisrael. You familiar with that? That they unearth the bones and then they rebury here in Eretz Yisrael. Anyway, that's called Yom Likud Atzamos, and that also generates Aninus, but on the lowest level. So you have two extremes here. The most extreme L'chumra is going to be Yom Misu Kfura. On the other extreme, you're going to have Yom Likud Atzamos, and in the middle, you have what's called Shmua Rechoka, a Shmua which he heard about during the Shloshim Yom, but after the days of Shiva. Correct? Is Yom Shmua, right? The day that he heard about it. And the Gemara, in the name of Rava, is going to analyze a brisa that says that Yom Shmua ki Yom Kvura. Now, here we have to introduce the theory of relativity. That middle category of Yom Shmua has certain dinim in which it is chamur, like the Yom Kvura, which is the Spitz of Aninus, and that's called the mitzvahs Shiva Ushloshim. So from the day that he hears about the dead, he counts Shivas Yomim and he counts Shloshim. However, Lachilas Psachim, are we going to impose a chumrah as if it was Yom Kvura and prohibit it from eating the Korban Pesach? No. Ki Yom Likud Atzamos. In that, relative to that din of Achilas HaPesach, we're going to equate and categorize Yom Shmua as Yom Likud Atzamos. And just like Yom Likud Atzamos is a watered-down kind of aninus, and therefore would certainly not prevent him or prohibit him from eating the Korban Pesach, so too Yom Shmua, from the perspective of can he eat the Korban Pesach or can he not, is classified and is equal to Yom Likud Atzamos. That's the introduction to this brisa. The problem is that the brisa continues and then seems to contradict itself, because the next line of the brisa says, Echad zeh v'echad zeh, tovel v'ochel b'kodshim le'eret. I mean, the brisa is saying that in all cases, whether it's Likud Atzamos or whether it's Yom Shmua, he's allowed to eat kodshim. And that's what the Gemara points out right away. Hagufa Kashi, you have an inherent stira in this brisa, because you said in the first part of the brisa, Yom Shmua ki Yom Kvura, lemitzvah shiva shloshim. However, lachilas psachim ki Yom Likud Atzamos, which means that after he hears about the dead, that following night, he's allowed to eat from the Korban Pesach, just like the case of Likud Atzamos, michlal Yom Kvura. It would seem to imply that we're on the lower end, meaning Yom Shmua ki Yom Likud Atzamos, but not Yom Kvura, that Michal the Yom Kvura fil erev nami lo achil, that he can't eat the Korban Pesach. But then it says in the second part of the brisa, Echad zeh v'echad zeh, presumably including even the case of Yom Kvura, Tovil v'ochel kodshim this. And Rav Chizda is going to give a simple answer, Tanoihi. Okay, there's one Tanu who says that, eating korbanos or eating the Korban Pesach is forbidden on the night after the burial, and that's something that we're familiar with from Omid Aleph. And the second price is a Tanu who says, no, there's no Isur Onen here for the sake of the Korban Pesach, and we're going to allow him to eat it, fine. But then we get to Rav Barafun, which is the punchline of Esugi. And that's very complicated. Lo kasha kan sheshom Shmuel meso samach l'shkiyas achama. Lok tu el atzon samach l'shkiyas achama. Meso mesu kvar samach l'shkiyas achama. Kan li'achas shkiyas achama. So that, in Mirz Hashem, will be the subject for tomorrow. And what's the schedule for tomorrow?